Tensions between China and Japan have entered a sharp new phase following a public statement by China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi that strongly condemned recent remarks on Taiwan made by Japan's new Prime Minister. The dispute has rapidly evolved over the past 2 weeks, pushing relations between the two Asian neighbours into one of their most serious diplomatic confrontations in years. The issue began when Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi responded to a question in Parliament earlier this month about how Tokyo might react to a hypothetical Chinese attack on Taiwan. Her comments immediately drew attention, not only in Japan, but across the region, where concerns about stability in the Taiwan Strait continue to grow. Beijing considers Taiwan its own territory, has not ruled out the use of force to bring the island under its control, and views any reference to potential military action by Japan as a direct challenge to its sovereignty. Taipei, for its part, rejects Beijing's claims, arguing that only Taiwan's people have the authority to decide the island's future. This already sensitive backdrop set the stage for Wang Yi's intervention over the weekend. In an official statement posted on the Chinese Foreign Ministry's website, Wang sharply criticized Takaichi's remarks. He accused Japan of crossing what he described as a red line in China's national security posture. He also warned that Tokyo was sending what he called a dangerous and unacceptable signal at a time of heightened tensions. Wang Yi is now the most senior Chinese official to comment publicly on the matter since Takaichi's remarks were made. His statement underscored how seriously Beijing views the situation and suggested that China is prepared to take additional diplomatic steps if it believes Japan is altering its long-standing approach to Taiwan. In his comments, Wang said Japan's new Prime Minister was attempting to intervene militarily in an issue that China considers internal. He described this attempt as shocking and further accused the Japanese government of openly giving what he called the wrong signal to pro-independence forces in Taiwan. According to the statement, China believes Japan's position is destabilizing the region and undermining decades of diplomatic understanding between the two countries. The controversy stems from an exchange in the Japanese Parliament on November 7th. During a session in the lower house, a lawmaker asked Prime Minister Takaichi whether Japan would consider responding militarily if China launched an attack on Taiwan. Takaichi replied that such an attack could indeed trigger a military response from Tokyo. That reply immediately prompted concern in Beijing, where the government has long insisted that other countries refrain from any language suggesting military involvement in the Taiwan Strait. Beijing raised the matter with the United Nations on Friday. In its communication to the UN Secretary-General, China warned that it would defend itself against what it described as dangerous shifts in Japan's security posture. It argued that Japan was moving away from commitments it made after World War II regarding the use of military force. Japan quickly dismissed Beijing's complaint to the United Nations. Tokyo described the complaint as entirely unacceptable and reaffirmed that the country's commitment to peace remains unchanged. Japanese officials said the Prime Minister's remarks in Parliament were made in response to a hypothetical situation and did not indicate a shift in Japan's overall strategic position. Despite Japan's explanation, China has continued to escalate its criticism. In his weekend statement, Wang Yi said China must resolutely hit back over Japan's move. He further warned that if Japan, in his words, persists in its wrong course, then China would consider revisiting what he called Japan's historical crimes during its wartime past. This reference to history was a pointed reminder of long-standing tensions between the two countries, particularly over Japan's role in the Second World War. Wang's comments suggested that China may be prepared to use historical grievances as part of its diplomatic strategy if tensions continue to rise. Such references tend to resonate strongly among Chinese citizens and often shape domestic narratives about Japan. Prime Minister Takaichi, speaking to reporters after the G20 Leaders Summit in South Africa, did not directly comment on Wang Yi's remarks. She said only that Japan remained open to dialogue with China despite Beijing's increasingly forceful tone. Japanese officials indicated that no bilateral meeting between the two sides took place during the summit, which had been expected. China confirmed earlier that it did not plan to meet Japan's delegation at the gathering. The absence of dialogue at the G20 was another sign of how strained diplomatic relations have become. The dispute has begun to affect not only political messaging, but also broader exchanges between the two countries. Analysts note that the fallout has already reached trade and cultural ties, with concerns emerging about future economic cooperation. China is Japan's largest export market after the United States. Trade between the two countries is substantial, and any sustained diplomatic rift risks disrupting supply chains and commercial flows. According to United Nations trade data, China purchased approximately $125 billion worth of Japanese goods in 2024. This makes the health of the bilateral relationship critical for both economies. Over the past decade, China and Japan have navigated multiple diplomatic challenges, including disputes over maritime boundaries, defense policy, and historical memory. But the current confrontation over Taiwan marks one of the most serious clashes in years. It reflects how regional security dynamics are shifting, particularly as states reassess their policies in response to China's growing political and military influence. Tokyo has been expanding its defense capabilities, citing increased security threats in East Asia. Chinese officials argue that Japan's defense reforms are destabilizing and contrary to the commitments it made in the post-war era. Japan says those reforms are necessary to ensure national security in a rapidly changing strategic environment. The Taiwan issue has become a major flashpoint in this broader context. China has intensified military activity around Taiwan, including regular air and naval patrols near the island. The United States, Japan, and several regional partners have expressed concern that any escalation in the Taiwan Strait would have severe consequences for the region. Takaichi's remarks fit within this broader reassessment of Japan's defense posture. For years, Tokyo avoided making direct statements about how it would respond to a conflict involving Taiwan. The Prime Minister's recent comments marked a departure from that cautious approach. While Japanese officials framed the remarks as part of a parliamentary exchange, China has interpreted them as a signal that Japan is moving toward a more assertive security policy. Wang Yi's decision to respond publicly and directly is significant. It reflects Beijing's view that Japan's comments could influence the wider international debate about Taiwan and potentially reshape security calculations in the Asia-Pacific region. China's statement also referenced Japan's wartime history, a theme that often emerges during moments of diplomatic friction. Beijing maintains that Japan has not fully reconciled with its past actions, a point Japanese officials dispute. By bringing up historical issues in this context, China appears to be signaling that it may broaden its criticism beyond the Taiwan remarks if tensions continue. Meanwhile, Japanese officials are trying to maintain a measured public position. By stating that Japan remains open to dialogue, Prime Minister Takaichi has attempted to diffuse the immediate diplomatic tension. However, her lack of direct response to Wang Yi's remarks suggests that Tokyo is navigating a complex situation in which any further public statements could escalate the dispute. The question now is how the confrontation will develop in the coming weeks. Both countries have strong strategic and economic incentives to avoid a prolonged confrontation, but the political pressures on each government are significant. China views Taiwan as a core national interest and reacts strongly to any foreign government suggesting military involvement. Japan's political leadership is increasingly focused on national security and has faced domestic pressure to clarify its position on potential conflicts in the region. At the same time, the United Nations communication underscores how far China is prepared to take the matter if needed. Raising the issue before the Secretary-General was an unusual step that signals the seriousness of Beijing's concerns. Japan's rejection of that complaint points to a widening gap between the two governments' interpretations of the situation. As tensions stand now, neither side appears ready to shift its position. China continues to argue that any reference to military involvement in Taiwan is an infringement on its sovereignty. Japan maintains that its statements do not represent a policy change and insists it remains committed to peace and stability. Trade, diplomacy, and broader regional cooperation are now tied to how the two governments manage this dispute. The situation remains fluid, and further statements from either side could either ease tensions or deepen them. For now, regional observers continue to monitor the developments closely. The dispute comes at a moment when East Asia is facing multiple security challenges, from North Korea's missile tests to territorial disputes in the South China Sea. The Taiwan issue has become a central point of contention, and the remarks by Japan's new Prime Minister have placed Tokyo squarely in the middle of that highly sensitive debate, with China signalling that it is prepared to respond firmly and Japan insisting that it has not altered its long-standing commitment to peace. The diplomatic landscape is set for a period of heightened scrutiny. The crisis continues to unfold, and both governments face increasing pressure to clarify their positions while avoiding further escalation. The dispute between China and Japan now hinges on how both sides manage the fallout from Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks and Beijing's sharp response, leaving regional stability in a delicate balance.